All right, today's guest is six-time Emmy Award-winning director and producer Jason Hehir. He's rattled off a bunch of memorable projects, and the latest is The Last Dance, which we're all watching on ESPN every Sunday night now. So, Jason, thanks for joining us. Appreciate the time. I know it's been a busy couple weeks for you.
Yeah, we're starting to wind down. We as we tape this, we just turned in episode 10 yesterday, so we're just on the wire to get this thing done. But it's been a busy 8 weeks in quarantine. So we've I'm actually thankful that I've had something to do every day. I don't think I'm going through quite the mental anguish that other people are, bouncing off the walls because I've been laser focused every day on these things done.
For sure. As you know, this is Celtics podcast, Celtics video. So we're going Celtics related to start out here. So I got to ask you about this whole thing with the golf thing with Danny Ainge and playing golf with Michael Jordan in the middle of a playoff series. There's been a little bit of a backlash from like the current players in the league because they're always hearing the older guys chirping at them for being too friendly. When you heard Danny tell that story, did that pop into your mind, like wondering what the reaction was going to be when it actually went public?
No, because I had read that story so many times, and we probably, I try not to tell any stories that someone can't tell from a first-person perspective. So if we weren't able to land Danny for an interview, or Mark Vantel, the writer who tells the bulk of the story, who was actually with them that day, then we wouldn't have told it. But it didn't occur to me that there was going to be any sort of backlash, because I know that today's players get a lot of the criticism of banana boat and trading jerseys and how it used to be rough and tumble in the 80s and 90s and guys wouldn't help each other up off the floor and all that. But I think, these players are human beings, and off the court, they left a lot of those things on the floor. Now, some of them carried over. You'll if you want to talk to the Bulls and the Pistons about that these days, I bet the Celtics and the Lakers probably have something to say about that too from back in the day. But it actually, I just thought it was funny because it speaks to how much Michael was addicted to golf even back then, that he wanted to find a place to play. I think they had 2 days off, Friday and Saturday, between games 1 and 2, and he wanted to find a place to play. There was Greg Kite was also, it was 5 guys. There was a fivesome that day, and Greg Kite was also one of the guys who played. So he played with at least 2 Celtics. Greg Kite, who used to live across the street from me in Newton, Mass.
There's a story.
Yeah, we used to knock on his door and try and get him to come play with us all the time, to the point where his wife started answering the door because he got sick of us. But this was like, it just shows you like how almost quaint it was back in the day. That Greg Kite lived in a house that looked like mine. He just lived across the street, and we used to. He gave me an autograph one time, but it was old school NBA. So the guys who were coming off the bench were not living large. I think the minimum salary then was probably like in the 5 figures somewhere. So. But he was there, and to answer your question, it didn't occur to me that there would be any kind of eyebrow raising, but I just love the story, and I love that the slightest thing, even when Michael was young like that, he would just take the slightest thing and make it into something that would make him want to go off, and he did.
Yeah, and Danny, just so you know, Danny is a guy who golfs every opportunity he can too. I would classify it as an addiction, but I don't know if he would like that, but he's probably out there during our playoff series playing around.
I mean, and he's played with Michael a lot through the year too. And he was a Blazer when they played against Michael. Danny fits into more categories of our documentary than you would think. And he's a great storyteller.
In what ways?
Well, he played against him obviously in the 80s, and then I believe he wasn't on the. Was he his son? No.
Yeah.
But was he his son in '93? I know
he was on the team that went to the finals.
He was okay. So he played against Michael 2 times in the finals. He played against him in '92. Yeah, he was, because they had that altercation. They had that fight at half court when Michael stuck his finger in his face and said, "Don't touch me." But Danny was scrappy, man. But he played against him on 3 teams, and in 3 big scenes that we focus on in this documentary, Danny was right there front and center for all of it.
Danny's one of my favorite guys to interview because he's just so chill, and he's like almost willing to talk about anything that's not going to put the Celtics and the team at risk. What was that experience like for you to be able to sit down with him, and maybe some of the stories that came out of that conversation that didn't make it into the documentary?
Oh, it was awesome. I anytime I'm interviewing anyone who's Boston related, even now, like to do something with the Celtics, I feel like I'm 10 years old again. So my brother Brandon actually still lives. He lives in Needham. So he came to the shoot that day. We did it at your facility, your
Mm-hmm.
practice facility. And I think that like the paint was still drying. It was so new back when we did this, probably almost 2 years ago.
Yep.
But it's so awesome to interview any of those guys. And then of course, Bird, like interviewing Bird, I flew out to Indianapolis to do that. And that was like mind blowing. That's when I really felt that's probably the most, the most out of body experience I've had in this entire process, even interviewing Michael, to interview Larry Bird. I've never met him before. I got an autograph from him when I was a little kid. We went to Hellenic College one day, and we stood outside and we asked for autographs. And I remember Danny was super nice to me that day. Fred Roberts was there. This was back in like 87, 88. And but I had never met Bird. So he sat down in his office, and I told him I was from Boston, and I was expecting him, I would guess that everywhere he goes, someone says to him, I'm a Celtics fan and thank you for those days and all that. So I wasn't expecting much out of it. And I said, I'm actually from Boston. And he lit up. Really? Where are you from? And
this is Bird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm from Newton. And he said, I lived in Brooklyn. I was like, yeah, we used to drive by your house all the time, hoping that you'd be outside. Cause he used to mow his lawn. He was like just a normal dude. And I did the interview, and then afterwards, I was, he got up to leave, and we were just kind of cleaning up what we had done in his office, the lights and all that. And he turned around, he's like, "So how often do you get back to Newton?" And I was in the corner just like shuffling papers, and I felt like the kid in the Mean Joe Green commercial when he turns around and throws the jersey. I was like, what? I turned into like third grade Jason in that moment. I couldn't believe that he was talking to me about Newton, Massachusetts, but that was really cool too. And I think that you'd asked, sorry, I got off on a tangent there, where you asked about Danny's stories that he told. He remembers things so vividly, and he had firsthand accounts of specifically playing against Michael, both on the court and on the golf course. So they talked a lot of trash to each other. And I think that through the years, Danny has probably gotten the better of Michael on the course. I think Michael has gotten to be a better golfer, but Danny's always been an incredible athlete.
What's that experience like? Because I got to imagine that it's just got, I mean, you touched on kind of being out of body when you first walked into a room with a guy you literally grew up watching and idolizing and going to championship parades to see him stroll past you in a duck boat. But what is it like to have your career path go to a point where you are interviewing those people for a project you are working on?
It's just gratitude. It's like I'm overflowing with gratitude in those moments and on those days, like getting ready in my hotel, like getting the final questions ready and final check in the mirror before you leave the room and go to the shoot. It's like, how am I lucky enough to be able to do this job? Like anyone who loves what they do is lucky. I mean, this was the specific job that I dreamed of having when I was a little kid. So it's surreal. I don't think your brain is meant to there's a reason why people get starstruck. It's not because, I'm trying to get their autograph or anything. It's because they are two-dimensional to me in my head. They don't really exist as people. I told my brothers that meeting Michael for the first time was like meeting Santa Claus. Like you've heard of this person, you know what they look like, you know all the stories, but it doesn't make sense that they're an actual living, breathing human being with a heartbeat and interacting with you. So it takes you a second. It takes me a second at least. I had the same feeling with Magic when I met him or when I interviewed him. It's just like, how am I like that? I look at their hands always when I shake their hands, and I'm thinking like, those are the same hands that's the gnarled finger that Bird held up when he won the 3-point contest in '88. And these are the hands that Magic's hands. That's the hand that shot the baby hook that ruined my night and my family's night back in '87. And Jordan too, like shaking his hand, which is, it's the size of this laptop. It's enormous. And thinking like, that's the hands that shot the shot in '98 and the hands that shot the shot in '82 against Georgetown. So it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that they're actual people, because they seem just like statues. So, but that's the cool part of it. That's the cool part of the challenge is okay, how do I make this person into a human being so that the people at home can get the same feeling that I had when I start to get to know them.
One more question about that team in the '86, and to me, especially after watching the doc, is like, that's really when MJ kind of turned into MJ, and it was like the magic around him of that this guy literally, like Larry Bird said, is God disguised as Michael Jordan. Yep. But when you look back at that '86 team, I'm really curious to hear what Jordan and Pippen and all these guys maybe said about that '86 team, because I know that in the documentary you relayed how many great players the Celtics had on that team,
Mhm.
but no one publicly said that that might be the greatest team that was ever assembled in basketball. I'm just curious to hear if anyone made a comment like that or had a story to tell about that 86 team.
Well, Pippen wasn't around. The only guy that
Yep,
the
sorry
only guy
about that.
that
Yeah.
interviewed were Paxson, Michael, and I think Rod Higgins may have been on that 86 team, although I'm not sure he lasted until 85, 86 with Michael. But it was really Michael. And the cool part about it is that he was starstruck to play against them on the parquet at the Garden, the way that I would be starstruck to meet these guys. He was the same way, because back then he was 23. He had just turned 23 when that game happened, because his birthday is in February, and the game was on Game 2 was April 20th of 86. But I remember he said, like, this is what I was there for. This is CBS. So it was like I just think it's like kind of cute that these guys, they know that it's a national game and they're psyched up to play in that game. Obviously at that time, we didn't have historical perspective in 1986 to say this is the best team ever. But when you look back now, it's impossible to argue eras. But it's fun to listen to the Bob Ryans and the Bill Simmonses and those kind of people argue in favor of the Celtics being one of, if not the best team of all time, because they were loaded and they have Walton coming off the bench and just such a fun team to watch play. I love when they put those old games on like ESPN Classic to watch those Celtics play, because it was so much fun just to watch Bird move without the ball, and that was so much fun. So I think that they didn't speak about the X's and O's of the team. But I did find it interesting that Michael was he understood that this is like the bright lights. You're playing against the number one team in the league at their home place in the storied Boston Garden, and he said on CBS, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, when I was watching it, and my couch is right over here, but when I was watching, I watch it every Sunday with my girlfriend, and she's not even a basketball fan, so I had to kind of put the context in there, and I'm like, pause. Do you realize that he just scored 63 against like the best team possibly ever created? Because not everyone understands like how great that team was and how unbelievable his performance had to be to put a team on his back and almost win.
And fouled Walton out. So the fact that Walton had 6 personal fouls, most or not, if not all of them on Michael, means that he blew by the guy who was guarding him, and Walton had to pick him up on help side. So
something tells me that was Danny Ainge a few times.
Danny was there. Rick Carlisle had his moment. That was on the TBS game. I think it was Rick Barry saying that Rick Carlisle wants his mommy.
Yeah. And Carlisle's just shaking his head like, I don't know what to do.
But Jordan did say that he knew he didn't have a problem with any of those guys, but he loved playing against DJ because DJ was really smart. But he knew that if DJ tried to guard him close, he said I was quicker than him. So my hands were quicker than his, and if he tried to come up on me, I could go right past him. You haven't seen the last of Larry because he's the coach of the Pacers in episode 9 when the Bulls faced the Pacers in '98, and I just thought it was so cool that Larry got to have a little arc in this documentary, because you see him in episode 2 facing Michael on that 63-point game we talked about. And it was only so significant because he did it against the Celtics. It wasn't like he just went out and did this against a random, like a Hawks team. It still would have been a record, but to do it against perhaps the best team ever. Like you said, they only lost by 4 points. And then in episode 5, he's Michael's coach in the All-Star game. And in episode 9, he's coaching against him in what probably will go down as the toughest series that they played in during that dynasty. So there's a moment between Larry and Michael at the end of episode 9 after Game 7 that I can't wait for people to see.
Looking forward to that. Let's talk a little bit more about just the project in general. To me, this is kind of like the perfect storm of this being moved up to go out and be public on ESPN during this hiatus. I'm curious for you, at what point did you realize that this was going to turn into what it's turned into, in being like the thing for every sports fan in America to take in every week?
I think it was the first week. Well, the day that it premiered, I remember it was trending on Twitter at 11 a.m. on that Sunday. And I was with my girlfriend. We went to there's only one bagel place open in Tribeca in New York. We went there, we stood in line, and we went to the park and sat down, and we saw people reading a paper as the Daily News, and Jordan was on the cover of the Daily News that day. And it started to dawn on me. We heard people talking about it in line at the place. It started to dawn on me, like, because I've seen these episodes so much. I was dreading people seeing episode 1 and 2 because I had seen those the most, and I was so sick of them. And to me, they were boring. So I was.
And to us, we're like, we can't wait for this.
Yeah, well, there's there's nothing else out there, so we probably
Yeah.
could have shown just like childhood drawings of Michael Jordan, and people would have eaten it up. But I really didn't know how people were going to respond to it. I thought, I thought we might be, in the worst possible limbo, in that the people who knew the story would say, I already knew all this, and the people who didn't know it would say, this is too basketball heavy. I don't feel like watching it. So I was really nervous with how people were going to respond. I think I did a few interviews the week before with some critics, and I was shocked that they said, like, this is really good. Not that I thought it was bad. I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to diminish it, but people were liking it early on more than I thought they would. It was resonating on a level that I didn't realize it would resonate, especially the music, which I put a ton of thought into that.
Awesome.
And I thought, like, if maybe 1 or 2 people tweet about this is cool music, like, that would be really gratifying. But
And a lot of people have tweeted that.
For people to be catching on the way that they have, and for people to like the former Chicago resident thing with President Obama, I never expected that. And all of a sudden I'm getting sent tweets and texts, like my phone was blowing up that night during the show. So I'm sitting there thinking, like, I think this is going to be big. And then the ratings came out, and the ratings were surpassed anything that we had expected. So it was really that first week, and then people's anticipation for it the next week. And then there were like podcasts about the show and stuff. It's surreal because we've been sitting in a room, a dark edit room, with just a group of people watching this thing, not knowing what people were going to say or what this moment was going to feel like. And then all of a sudden, like, literally the world is talking about it. I'm getting phone calls from Australia and Philippines and people like that, places like that. So I guess to answer your question, it was the day of, I started thinking, like, this is like catching on. I think we had like 13 of the top 20 trending topics that night. It was like everyone's like everything to watch this. So it really was that Sunday and Monday that we realized that this is bigger than we had expected it to be.
You talked a little bit there about how many people and like important people in the world that you've interviewed. I think I heard at one point like 105, 110 interviews that you guys did.
Yeah.
It's just a wild number. I can't imagine how much footage you guys have. And not only of that, but probably some of the footage that came out of the vaults of the Chicago team that might not have made it into the actual documentary. So what's something that stands out to you that you captured both as interviews with all of these people, these 106 people or 106 interviews that you conducted, and then maybe some of the stuff that didn't make it in the documentary from a footage standpoint that was in that vault that you would want people to know does exist or does stick out to you?
There's not much in terms of the interviews. You try to get like 80% of the people you interview into the doc is normally a good batting average number. And we had well over that, because I think that we used 95 or 96 of the interviews, and we did 106. We did 108 shoots, but because we interviewed Michael 3 times, and we interviewed his sons both together. But 106 people were interviewed for the doc itself, and very, very few of them didn't make it in. We interviewed like Michael's Little League coach and his first basketball coach in Wilmington back when he was a kid. And those stories were great, but it was just, we had to keep moving in episodes 1 and 2. So we didn't get to put a lot of that stuff in. I'm trying to think of who else. Dominique Wilkins. If you told me that Dominique Wilkins wouldn't be in this doc 2 years ago, I would have laughed at you, because those dunk contests, especially the '88 one, was such a seminal memory I have as a kid growing up, because I cared probably more about the dunk contest than I did about the finals at that age. All I wanted to do was dunk. But it just we didn't get time to spend telling that story, so he didn't make it in. But as far as the footage goes, we put just about every last, scene that you would want to see. Like, of course, like, they followed them around the golf course all day. And Steve Kerr was golfing that day. I think Bushler and Longley were out there, Wennington. So there's that kind of stuff. The one that actually stood out to me, it was a quick little Easter egg it was kind of a blink and you miss it kind of thing. And this is, we had a lot of cooks in the kitchen on this. So someone made a note that, like, they needed more explanation for why this shot was in there. but it was Kobe was watching Michael play against the Clippers. In episode 2, we're in LA and they've yet to win a road game. And Michael says to them, like in the tunnel, like, I don't want to have to say this again. Let's go out there and get our first win. And they take them to, I think, double overtime. And Michael scores some ridiculous 39 or 45 or something like that. But as they take the floor, there's a shot of Kobe watching the game from a few rows deep under the basket. And I just thought it was a cool thing to show that if people get it, then like they're like, oh my God, that's Kobe. He's 19 years old, and on his off night, he's here to study Michael Jordan. And if you don't get it, then you just missed it. And people were insisting, some of the executives were insisting, well, if you put that in, you have to interview him about it. I just decided it was too much work, and we had to move. We didn't have time. But it was little things like that. It wasn't like huge scenes that we left out, because we really made an effort to put as much of that cool stuff. I mean, there's only so much you can watch of them sitting on the bus quietly and looking out the window. So there's a lot of that kind of footage, but the moments, the real moments that you would want to tell people about, we tried to put in as much as we could.
You talked about some of the executives there, and I know that there's been a lot of hands in this project. I'm most curious about how you got into this project, because I've heard you talk about it was presented to you by Mandalay Entertainment. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Mandalay Sports Media, I think, is there.
Okay. So I want to know, like, now I understand that they presented it to you, but why did they present that to you? What relationships did you have prior that made them come to you?
I think that they had just, they were casting a pretty wide net for directors, and they knew that I had worked in the sports space before. I think that someone at that company and I may have shared an agent, and my agent reached out to me and said, would you be interested in this? And of course, it was like, I will drop this phone and go to the airport and fly wherever you want me to fly to try and get this job. Now, luckily, the meeting took place in New York, so it was right down the street. And I had to meet with Adam Silver. I remember he said this was in March of 2017. I met with Adam Silver, and I'd never met him before. And he walked into the room and he stuck his hand out and he said, congratulations. And there was a table next to me, a big oak table, and I knocked on it and said, don't jinx it. It was 13 more months it took for them to actually officially greenlight it.
Oh my God.
This process was really, really slow. It was really kind of like a video game. Like, you have to beat all the henchmen and then you get to the big boss. In September of 17, it still wasn't officially greenlit yet, but that's when I met Michael, and he was like the last person that I had to meet for him to, I don't know, I guess sign off. I don't know what I could have done in that meeting for him to say, I don't want to work with this guy, but it went well. We just hung out for a little less than an hour at a hotel up the street in New York. And we talked about the 63-point game, because I told him I was there when I was a kid with my dad. We talked about that. And next thing you know, we're talking about his Hall of Fame speech, and we're talking about Republicans buy sneakers too. And we're talking about the misconceptions about him and how people perceive him and what irks him, what doesn't. He was ready to speak.
So you touched on something there that kind of bleeds into a question that I really want to ask you. And you were living this, like you're in your 40s, you were living this back in the 80s and 90s. So you probably have some, recollection of what was going on at that time, much more so than someone who might be 30 to 35, even in their late 30s. How do you think that the fact that you grew up during that time period affected the way that you put this together? And would it be different if you were 35 years old and you didn't grow up during that time?
Maybe. I mean, a lot of the people on our staff are of that age range, and they remember Michael as a giant, pop cultural figure. But they didn't chart his whole career and watch his whole career happen in front of them. I literally watched his career develop, because when he came in the league as a rookie, that's when I first started really watching and paying attention to the standings and the box scores and understanding, what division he was in and who their rivals were, and checking the Herald every morning. I would wake up and go to the back of the Herald and flip through the box scores and see how many he scored and how many Magic scored. So that was the birth of my sports fandom, was when he was a rookie. And as he progressed and improved, I started to understand more and more and play basketball myself. I wasn't quite as good as he was, but so that, yeah, I think it informed a lot of it. Like, I was fascinated, for instance, with the shot over Craig Elo in '89. So I knew that we wanted to spend a lot of time breaking that there were moments throughout his career that served as tent poles for like, okay, you're definitely going to do the 89 game. You're definitely going to do the shrug game in 92. You're definitely going to do, a deep dive onto when he came back. That was a huge moment when he came back in 95, even though he didn't have a great game. That day, I think everyone will remember where they were if they're a sports fan on that day watching that game. The double nickel game about a week and a half later, I remember that vividly. So they're definitely living through it. I think informed where I should put my attention just from the memories that I have of what moments were important and warranted that kind of attention. Also, the music, you name a year and I can tell you what music I was listening to, and specifically what hip hop I was listening to at that point, because I was a massive hip hop fan back then and still am. But back then, Jordan was new to the NBA. Hip hop was new to a white kid in the suburbs, and all of that. I was all about sports and music. So this is like a field day for me to be able to tell that story of my sports fandom and my music fandom and how it grew from 84 to 98. So I just tried to convey that as much as I could.
A couple more questions before we let you roll, but we're heading into the weekend now. We're going to see the final 2 episodes on Sunday night. What can you tell us about, as a little bit of a preview of what's to come in these final 2 episodes before we say sayonara to The Last Dance?
2 of the most difficult series that the Bulls played in during their dynasty happened in the end of that 98 season, which is the 7-game series against the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals. Only the second time they went to 7 games in any of their championship runs. The other one was against the Knicks years before. And then the 6-game series against Utah, which, everyone knows what happened. I don't want to give too much away, but we really, that was the point when the cameras were really getting the most access that season, these cameras that were embedded with them, because the team was so used to the cameras being around. That moment in episode 8 where Michael's got the cigar and he's swinging the bat in the locker room. You don't get that moment if it happened in November, because the cameramen were not yet welcomed as much as they were. They did an amazing job all season long, getting just like piece by piece, getting gradually more and more access. So
that might have been my favorite moment, by the way.
It's like Al Capone. I mean, he's I mean, it's comical. It's something that you would draw like a caricature. Is Michael Jordan chomping on a cigar with a baseball bat, talking about how he's going to exact revenge on somebody. It's like Tony Soprano. So I love that moment too. That's one of those moments that you see for the first time. It's like, I mean, we could have played that whole scene is a few minutes longer, and it's just jam after jam after jam, just sitting there watching him like stew after that game. So. You get a lot of moments like that. I mentioned that moment later on with Larry and Michael after Game 7 in the tunnel, which I think people are really gonna. It's a quick moment, but I think people are gonna really enjoy it. I expect a lot of memes to come out of that one. We do a backstory, the origin story of Steve Kerr, which might be my favorite story. That deserves its own documentary. Steve Kerr is such an impressive guy on and off the floor, and such an intelligent, incisive interview, and just a really decent person, and his mom plays a major role in this. I would recommend to people to look up Steve Kerr in the New York Times. There's a big feature they did a few years back on him and his life, and a tragedy that befell that family that kind of informed who he is and made him into who he is now. People talk about, Michael punching him, and Michael said, I punched the smallest guy on the team. I couldn't believe it. But the irony is that there was no tougher bull in that entire span of championships than Steve Kerr to get where he was after what he went through. So I'm really proud of that story. I'm excited for people to see that. The iPad comes out a couple more times. You're going to see Michael watching things.
The best moments, right?
That's
the reactions are priceless.
That was kind of a last second decision, and it really has paid such dividends to watch him kind of like zone back into vintage MJ, vintage competitive MJ. So you'll see that right off the top of episode 9. I think he's holding on to that thing, watching something, and close to the end of episode 10, you'll see him with it again. There's a lot. We packed a lot of stuff into these last 2, and I'm particularly proud of it because our team worked their tails off to get these done. These episodes were edited almost entirely during the quarantine at people's homes, and we had to piece it together and kind of stitch everything together. And everyone was doing a little bit here, a little bit there, and stitch them all together into one big piece. So all of us are really proud that we were able to get that done in the last 8 weeks. I mean, we literally yesterday just delivered episode 10. So it's been quite the journey. It's going to be a whole range of emotions for me and for my team at 11:01 on Sunday night, that this huge chapter in my life is over. It's been almost 4 years that I've been working on this thing. And in a lot of ways, it's been 35 years. If you go back to when I was 8 years old and first saw Michael Light the Garden. So it's something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I'm incredibly, incredibly lucky to have been able to tell the story.
What are the emotions that you think you're going to feel?
I tend to get sentimental at ends of chapters of my life like that. So I'm not going to be like a sobbing mess. I'm certainly going to be relieved, but it's almost like you miss. It's been a grind and it's been grueling and it's been the hardest work that I've ever done. But you almost miss. It's become a part of me living with this story now for the past few years. So, and the people that I work with, it's so bittersweet for us because we had always envisioned what we're going to do when the thing is over and what kind of rap party we're going to have and how we're all going to be together. So that's gone. We can do Zoom meetings and things, but it's not the same. You want to like hug people and celebrate. So it will be relief. It'll be happiness. It'll be happiness that people responded the way that they did. I'm proud of 9 and 10. I hope that people will respond to them the way that they have to the earlier episodes, because I think they're just as strong. But also it's gratitude that like I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to do this and to work with the people that I work with. I learned so much, both technically and just on a personal level, from the people I work with, and to meet all of these people that we interviewed. For me, like if you told me when I was at that game back in '86, watching Jordan, if you told me that this is what I'm going to be doing in 35 years, I would have been over the moon. Like, how did I get to be chosen to do that? So I just feel immensely thankful for the opportunity to tell the story.
Now, my last question, and I got to ask this because it's coming to an end, and I want to know what is next for you. And I want to preface it with a little bit of something. Just watching this and then watching a bunch of your interviews about The Last Dance since it started to come out, you're like an encyclopedia about all of these interviews about basically basketball from 1983 to 1998 at this point. Have you ever thought about a book? And if not, what do you think is next for you?
I don't think a book is next. I would love to write a book one day. I certainly have a ton of stories to tell that haven't been told from behind the scenes, and experiences that we've had with people that I think a lot of people would love to hear. These are things that my friends at home and my brothers and my family and stuff get to listen to me blab on about it at holidays and gatherings and things. But yeah, I would love to do that someday. And I don't know what's next. I don't know if a sports doc that I would throw myself into like this with both feet. I can see producing some stuff and helping out, consulting on things, and maybe executive producing stuff. But to direct another doc in the sports space, I don't know what would compare to this. I certainly will work in that space again, I hope, if I'm given the opportunity, but I don't know what would compare to this coming right off of this story. It was almost like you'd have to go complete opposite and tell a story about someone anonymous, just an incredible human interest story, because you're not going to measure up to, this is the holy grail of sports stories. And I've been lucky enough, like I said, to tell it. So I don't know, something non-sports. I'm a diehard music fan. And as we said before, a hip hop fan. I would love to do something about, some of those old groups and old artists that I loved. I got the opportunity the other day to speak to Rick Rubin on the phone, and that was, mind blowing for me, because that guy it's so many things that came out of his brain are things that informed the kind of music fan I became and the kind of director that I am now. So I'm not sure. I know I'm going to nap for a couple of days, and then we'll see what opportunities are out there and go from there.
I know whatever you wind up doing next is going to be successful. This has been an unbelievable experience for all of us in the sports space to be able to take this in during this crazy quarantine time. And if you ever want to do anything on the Celtics, just give us a ring. You know we're waiting for it, even if it's about Greg Kite living across the street from you in Newton.
I'll ask him. I'll say, I'm sorry, Mr. Kite. I'm the guy who was banging on your door nonstop 30 years ago. But if I can get a moment of your time, that would be great. Yeah. No, I would someday. I've never. The thing is, in Chicago, I've done the Bears, I've done the Bulls now, and you know, the Cubs obviously have stories to tell, but I've never really gotten to do anything about Boston. I was Doug Flutie for Halloween when I was 8 years old. Like I tried to I pitched that story to ESPN a while back to do like his life story through the lens of the game where he threw the pass.
Yeah.
But I'm always open to anytime anyone from Boston calls. I'm picking up the phone in the first ring.